Hey, what's up, everybody? True Boxing here. Thank you for coming back to Get Hit with the Truth. So today, going to do the What's Next on Anthony Yarde, the former world title challenger, following his revenge bout knockout of Lyndon Arthur. They fought on Saturday, December 4th, and Yarde came out and looked awesome. He just pressured Lyndon Arthur right from the get and dominated him and stopped him in 4 rounds. As he bounces back, avenges only his second pro defeat, and has put himself back in the driver's seat to fight for a world title. He's actually in line to fight the winner of Joe Smith Jr. and Callum Johnson, who collide January 15th. So he really, with this win, this impressive-ass win, put himself right there, because Lyndon Arthur was the #1 guy in the WBO, and this was considered a final eliminator to lock up Arthur or Yarde to fight for the title. And Anthony Yarde has put himself back in a position he's going to challenge for a title for the second time, and that's most likely taking place next. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if, because Joe Smith's fighting in January, I wouldn't be surprised if that ends up being a dogfight between Joe Smith and Callum Johnson, and then Joe Smith maybe needs 5 months off, 4 or 5 months off in between fights till like June or July. So Anthony Yarde, I wouldn't be surprised if he comes back in, takes a tune-up type bout. But I think by May, June, July at the latest, we should be seeing a winner of Smith and Johnson battling Anthony Yarde. And so the big question is, what's next for Anthony Yarde if he were to become the WBO light heavyweight champion of the world? I mean, it looks right now like the first half of the year could be mandatories for Dimitri Bivol. Bivol could fight Gilberto Ramirez. Could be stuff like that, but I also think it's possible that we could be seeing, Canelo moving up to light heavyweight at some point. I mean, I just think there's a lot of moving pieces in the heavyweight division and a lot of options. And if Anthony Yarde becomes the light heavyweight champion, he's just going to open the door up for him even more for some pretty big fights in the second half of the year, because he's the mandatory, so he'll have an optional defense that he can take if he becomes the champion. And I think he's got a solid shot to beat Joe Smith Jr., to be honest with you. But let's run them briefly through the top 10, because normally with my what's next, it's what are they going to do in their next fight. Well, we pretty much already know it's either going to be a tune-up guy or it's going to be Joe Smith Jr. for the WBO title. So what could potentially be later on in the year? Let's run through the top 10 and see. How about #1, the undefeated Dimitri Bivol? I wouldn't completely rule it out, but I'm pretty sure Bivol's going to have to make a WBA mandatory defense at some point. He just took on Umar Salamov in an optional defense the other day, this past weekend, got a win. I don't think he has a mandatory due yet, but I think the second half of the year he will. So I think that's going to handcuff Bivol from being able to have a unification bout, even though I'd love to see it, and I think it wouldn't be a hard fight to make, but we got to wait and see. But I'm going to lean towards the less likely on this one. #2 is the undefeated unified champion, Arthur Beterbiev. Beterbiev making a mandatory of his WBC belt right now. I think the first half of the year he's going to try to unify belts if he can, or if unification's not available, Arthur Beterbiev might say, hey, fuck it, I want to get my other mandatory out of the way in the IBF. So he might fight an IBF mandatory #1 contender, and then second half of the year he might be open to unifying if, they can't get a Canelo fight. So, I think this fight could definitely happen in the second half of the year, Beterbiev and Yarde. #3 is Joe Smith Jr. I think Joe Smith's going to beat Callum Johnson, and I think Joe Smith's going to fight Anthony Yarde towards the middle of 2022. So, excuse me, that's my thoughts on that one. These two guys are going to see each other in the ring for sure. #4 is Maxim Vlasov. I think it's taken a step back right now, unless Vlasov were to come out and make himself, a top contender by that point. I don't see Vlasov and Yarde colliding in 2022. Number 5 is Eliter Alvarez. I mean, depending on how Alvarez bounces back from the knockout loss to Joe Smith last year, he still hasn't come back yet. So, depending on how he bounces back, you know, in early 2022, that'd be the only way I could see him possibly fighting Yarde. But I wouldn't completely rule it out, because if Yarde can't get a unification bout or a big fight, he might go and take on a former champ like Eliter Alvarez. Number 6 is, I think, well, actually, Vlasov was number 5. He was number 6, was, I'm sorry, Eliter Alvarez was number 6. Number 5 was Callum Smith. You know, wouldn't completely rule it out, because they're both, you know, British fighters. I think Callum Smith could move himself in positioning with Anthony Yarde, especially a big British showdown. Not sure the promoters on this one. I want to say Anthony Yarde might have ties with Top Rank and ESPN, and Callum Smith is with DAZN. So I'm going to lean towards the less likely, but I wouldn't completely rule it out either. And then just filling out the top 10, you know, like Gilberto Ramirez, I already said, I don't think so. Guys like Jesse Hart and fighters like that, you know, it just depends on what Anthony Yarde is available to doing and what he has. But we know next is going to be the showdown with what's his name with Joe Smith or Callum Johnson for the WBO light heavyweight title. And the way he looked against Lyndon Arthur, I really think Anthony Yarde has all the tools to be a world champion. So we'll see what happens. But that's the what's next on Anthony Yarde following his impressive 4th round TKO of Lyndon Arthur. And Lyndon Arthur is going to have to start from scratch. He's dropping out of my top 10. I don't see him getting, I don't see him fighting a top 10 fighter in his next fight after being wiped out like that against Yarde. So I think Lyndon Arthur's going to have to bounce back the old-fashioned way, starting fresh and starting over. Maybe somebody will give him a crack towards the end of 2022, because he's a guy that was there. You know, they might look at him as a stepping stone fighter, but he really does have to start from scratch, and we'll see how 2022 goes for him following this knockout loss. All right, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed it. True Boxing, keeping it with the truth.